Good evening and welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us. This is a special show that attempts to take a deeper dive into what ASEAN really means to all of us, not just as Malaysians, but also as citizens of this greater association called ASEAN. Now, ever since the Bangkok Declaration, where ASEAN was formed purely on the back of security purposes, we have evolved way past that. And you see ASEAN intertwining with every facet of life here in the region. Trade has never ceased to exist in the region, even dating back to pre-ASEAN days. And as security is also still one of the issues on the table, the social evolution of ASEAN has taken on a whole new meaning with the chairmanship of Malaysia. In April, the Honorable Prime Minister did make the emphasis on the people something that was to be at the epicenter of Malaysia's chairmanship, and that has certainly become a theme of its own in this upcoming summit, which will be the second time the leaders of ASEAN meet in this year. This will also mark the birth of the ASEAN community, and we're extending the invitation to the rest of the world as the major superpowers convene right here in Kuala Lumpur. So just what have we achieved and where are we going? This show aims to answer those questions. And worry not, it will not be just me and my shiny disposition attempting to humor you for the next hour. I have some guests in the studio which will take this topic apart on ASEAN and its direction as we focus on the pre-ASEAN summit discussion of our people, our community, and our vision. So joining me to enable this discussion, we have with us Dr. Ishtiaq Hossain, who's an Associate Professor with the Department of Political Science at the International Islamic University Malaysia, IIUM. Welcome, Doctor. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for your invitation.
We also have Dr. Roy Anthony Rogers, Senior Lecturer with the Department of Strategik and International Studies at the University of Malaya. Thank you for being here, Doctor.
Thank you very much.
And representing the younger generation of ASEAN citizens is Fazillah Majeed, who's a third-year student with the Department of International and Strategic Studies at the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, UM.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Welcome to the show. So we're going to have a rather dynamic discussion, I hope, as the many areas of discussion, many areas do require discussion. We're going to start with the basics. What have we achieved since April? Now, the roadmap was laid out for the ASEAN community since 2009. We've taken it a step further, put the focus on the people. But really, what have we achieved in terms of bricks and mortar, concrete developments? Any one of you can start off. I think, Doctor, you should start off with this one, Roy.
Thank you very much. First and foremost, I would like to thank RTM for inviting all of us here, and for myself to share some thoughts on ASEAN. Coming back to your question on what have we achieved since the last meeting that was in April 2015. First, you see, we look at, in the document that was published, Malaysia have highlighted 8 points, key points. This was published in the post-April 2015 meeting. And among these 8 points, one of them is to achieve a community, and besides that, to stir up ASEAN, this togetherness, to support the SME companies. But more importantly, I believe that in the area of economic cooperation, there have been several technical issues that have been settled, such as reductions of tariffs and non-tariff barriers, that have been achieved since the beginning of the year. And besides that, since April 2015, there were also been more discussion on the role of ASEAN, centrality of ASEAN. So I think but it is still an ongoing process, and we have yet to see the actual fruit of it.
Mm-hmm. So we have a roadmap that's still under construction, so
yes,
to speak. But the ASEAN community is already about to be unveiled to the rest of the world. So just what is the ASEAN community? Dr. Hossain, your understanding?
You can have community. A community exists only when there are certain basic things which are very common, right? For example, you may have the same kinds of value systems, for example, or norms, right? So these are the very common things, just like the European Union has. In ASEAN's case, we always talked about, for example, the unique way that ASEAN has been making decisions, which is kampung style, consensus-based, right? Not not really European style. It's non-legal approach in the conduct of diplomacy.
It's friendly.
No formality, and very friendly kind of an environment. So only when these kinds of things happen and take shape that you can have a community. Right? And I'm not so sure whether we are yet there yet. You use the right words like it's still under construction. Right? So we have to work at all this for a long period of time because we don't have what the European common culture has, right? We don't have that here in Southeast Asia. So you have to find new ways of doing things. And so far we are struggling with that, no doubt about it, right? But we are not yet there yet, but I think the overall, the ASEAN countries and also the dialogue partners realize there's something uniqueness about ASEAN. So we have to keep working at it.
There is desire to
Right.
move in that direction.
Right.
Before we get into those little building blocks of what goes into a discussion at the ASEAN table, the principles of non-interference and consensus, which I think we should address, I do want to get the perspective of the young. What do you feel ASEAN means to you and your generation?
All right. Since its inception back then in 1960s, we can see ASEAN has evolved. As representing the younger generation, what we want to see in ASEAN is we want ASEAN to be a resilient organization, regional organization that actually incorporates the needs of the young people. You know, sports, ASEAN Youth Parliament is one of the ideas that can actually be realized, can be realized here in ASEAN. They have been moving. There are some attempts for the member states to create ASEAN Youth Leader Association, which is very good. But the level of awareness among the young people in Southeast Asia itself is very low. Relatively, Malaysia, if you want to compare with other Southeast Asian countries, if you ask young people out there what ASEAN is, they are not able to answer that, which is very...
If I may just add, that is one of the major challenge, that to bring ASEAN to, people-centered ASEAN as one of the major objectives of Malaysia as the chairman of ASEAN for 2015. And I think that is one area how are we going to bring ASEAN to be seen as not just an elitist organization.
I suppose it's easy to be critical of ASEAN. When you look at it from every perspective, a lot is still in conceptualization and being formed. But there are real success stories. For example, visa. The travel between ASEAN member states do not require a visa. And that is something that we take for granted because we show up at the immigration checkpoint, we hand them our passport, it says you're an ASEAN member state and you no longer require a visa to pass through. This is true for almost all ASEAN countries. And it's something that I do believe a lot of us take for granted. But having said that, coming back to how easy it is to be critical of ASEAN, the two standout points are the principles of non-interference and consensus. This has been somewhat of a problem in reaching a decision. And we felt the brunt of this decision during the haze, which was quite predominant and caused a lot of frustration in this region and also to our neighboring countries. Singapore, even Thailand and the Philippines felt the brunt of the haze for the very first time. And then there's also the issue of the South China Sea, where we cannot form a unified voice on this issue just because of these two principles. What do you make of the principle of non-interference and the requirement of a consensus before a decision is passed within the ASEAN member states?
It's an excellent question. I think you have to understand, one really has to understand the nature of states in Southeast Asia. These are what would like to call post-independent societies. And 50 years, 57 years is nothing in terms of the age of a state. So we are very concerned. I mean, these states are still forming its nationhood. And whatever you say, they're not going to, they're going to stand by their sovereignty. It's very precious to them. So it's going to take a lot of time to overcome this. European countries are not like that. because they are quite mature. One has history of 200, 300, 400 years, you see. So what they can do is very difficult for ASEAN countries to do it. So the expectations are actually increasing day by day, right? And this is as a result of globalization all over the world. So what I am trying to say, that we have to work with these notions. You simply cannot give it up because sovereignty is very precious. And this is one of the challenges that we are facing. Now, having said that, as you rightly pointed out, in terms of movement of people from one place to another, it is becoming much easier day by day. I still remember the days when between Singapore and Malaysia, there used to be only 2 airlines, right? Those days are gone. You are absolutely right.
That's in the history books.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like young people would not understand that. Well, I'm still very young at heart. I'm not that old yet. So those days are gone. Those days are gone. You have rightly pointed out. And things are beginning to happen. But she's absolutely right in terms of pointing out that consciousness among the young people about ASEAN is not that strong yet. There are a number of reasons for that. I think more and more facilities should be offered for the young people, right? Some of the states are already doing it on individual basis. For example, I know for sure that Singapore government actually offers special scholarship for ASEAN citizens, right? Brunei is also doing that, right? So individually they are trying to activate all this, right? So it will happen, but it has to do a lot with the sense of independence. It's so precious.
That they want to hold on to
exactly.
Yeah. And we need to understand that ASEAN, when it was established in 1967, the principle of non-interference have always been there. And that is part and parcel of ASEAN already. And as Dr. Ishtiaq had rightly mentioned, that countries in Southeast Asia which have only achieved independence less than 70 years. Since the earliest was Indonesia, then followed by other countries like Malaysia, or maybe earlier on you had Philippines. But most of us are still very nationalistic in our approach, in our foreign policy. So the issue of non-interference has to be still part of ASEAN. You see? And sometimes it's not fair if we look at how what the evolution of states in Europe, whereas they have gone through hundreds of years, they have gone through a long period of time as well. So I don't think ASEAN will ever, at least at this moment, would take away this principle of non-interference. It will still be part and parcel of, because the member states will not agree to that itself.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to come back to the young, because all these principles, having stood the test of time, may not stand the further test of time when the younger generation take over and ASEAN is in their hands. But having said that, when you look at the young of Malaysia, Singapore, Brunei, Thailand, Indonesia to a large extent, are very different from the younger generation in Laos, Cambodia, certain parts of the Philippines and Myanmar. There's a gap, I would say. There's a gap in education, there's a gap in access to infrastructure. So, having met your peers from all around ASEAN, do the young want the same thing from all the countries of ASEAN put together?
Surprisingly, they do want. We do have one vision in what we want from ASEAN. You see, you are totally right when you mention that the gap, the disparity among the young, among the youth in Southeast Asian countries is very high. That's why ASEAN needs to initiate more programs that actually involve young people. And one of the biggest achievement for ASEAN in incorporating young people is association of young leaders. ASEAN Young Leaders Association is established in every member state, and you can see once in a while they will have summits, and there will be ASEAN Youth Summit, and ASEAN also is working hard in ensuring that the youth participates in this in the regional decision-making process. Like
How much of your discussion is online as opposed to offline? Because that's the new way you communicate. You are borderless people.
trust me, I have been communicating with my friends all over ASEAN, all over Southeast Asia through Facebook and
There you
Twitter.
go.
That's us,
so
the younger generation.
It's a new ASEAN
Yeah.
coming forth.
It's not the young generation as well. For example, I will use myself as an example. I'm very active on Facebook, and most of my students would send me messages through Facebook. So it is one of those new things. And if my generation of people can actually appreciate that, so can the young people. There is no doubt about it. But having said that, there is a problem. Problem in the sense, or you might say it's a challenge. Most of our younger generation in this part of the world looks towards the West.
Right.
For any kind of encouragement, whether it's literature or movies or music or whatever it is. I don't know how this is going to change, but the kind of thing that you have in mind, it will not happen until unless this also changes. All right. Now, how do you do that as the state has to intervene? I don't know. I don't know the answer actually to that. Personally, I think it should be more on private initiatives, younger generations like you, on your own. Because if you are conscious about ASEAN, you should be more curious about ASEAN countries. I don't know how many countries have you visited, just an example, ASEAN countries. People would like to go to UK or to America for holidays rather than visit Brunei or Laos, right? Until that changes, that habit changes, I think it's going to be very difficult for us to develop this kinds of consciousness among the younger generation.
Right.
That is why it is very important for ASEAN in order to become a resilient regional organization to nurture the sense of togetherness among the ASEAN people. So,
Especially the young.
Especially the young.
And this is part of what I call the community building. Many will consider, okay, this is the year the community will be declared. But that is, I will always say that is not the end but of the journey. It's rather ASEAN goes into a new chapter within the history of ASEAN. And in 2 years from now, ASEAN will be way to 50 years, because it was 67 it was established. So come 2017, ASEAN will be 50 years. So we should not just look at 2015 as the year whereby, expect a miracle, the community. It takes a longer time. And that involves the youths, as Dr. Ishtiaq was mentioning, sharing common norms, commonality. And that will take time, at least maybe 10, 20 years. That's what a community will come into being.
Well, moving forward from this discussion, I want to go back to the history of ASEAN and its formation, which was largely based on security. With the terror attacks that recently rocked Paris, I think security has come back on the forefront of discussion in many of the ASEAN meetings, and rightfully it should be. So moving forward in the next part of the discussion, we'll be focusing on how ASEAN will address security as a community, and how these cooperations between member states should exist, and not only just protect security per se, but also maritime rights and maritime trade. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, the discussion on security will unfold here in the studio. And we'll also be addressing other tenets of ASEAN, so stay right there where you are watching us on TV1 right now, because when we come back, the discussion of ASEAN takes a further dive into the deep. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the programming. Some details there on how trade has flourished intra-ASEAN, and China is playing a significant role in that. In fact, there's this new proposition where the Premier of China will be visiting Malacca to sign what is the beginning of OBOR, more freedom of movement and connecting the ports within ASEAN to form a sort of maritime Silk Road. So that's all good and fine. Trade will flourish, and trade has historically done so in this part of the world. But the security of movement of goods, as of recent times, has taken a serious turn for the worse. Piracy in the waters of ASEAN has definitely surfaced, and how member states react to these concerns on top of the terror that rocked Paris is definitely something that will take center stage at the many summit meetings. So we'd just like to have a precursor to that discussion on security moving forward. Dr. Roy, would you like to address the historic security notion that ASEAN was conceptualized under and how that principle will stay embedded in the formation of the ASEAN community?
Right. You see, way back in 1967, one have to understand that the 5 founding members of ASEAN, namely Malaysia, the Philippines, Thailand, Singapore, and Indonesia, these were the non-communist countries which they wanted to form sort of a solidarity of the non-communist countries vis-a-vis the Indo-China countries that were facing the communist threat. And for a long time, during the Cold War period, ASEAN was overshadowed by this problem of communism, threat, and of course what happened in Indochina, the incursion of the Vietnamese troops into Cambodia. So that's why we had the Zophon, one can remember, in 1971, and then followed by the TAC in 1976, the TAC. So all this laid out the principles of non-interference, respect for sovereignty. These were all part and parcel of ASEAN in the early stage. Right until 1991, ASEAN was very much preoccupied by the Cold War scenario. But with the end of the Cold War, ASEAN have moved forward. But that doesn't mean that security has been dropped out from ASEAN. It has always been part and parcel of ASEAN's agenda of focus. But today I would say that since the end of Cold War, ASEAN have to focus more on also non-traditional security challenges. In the past, it was very much concerned on the traditional security challenges of state versus another state, and things like this. But today, one of the major concerns of ASEAN, I would say, is non-traditional issues.
Right.
Apart from the traditional issues of overlapping claim that is still occurring in Southeast Asia. So the non-traditional security threat that is prevalent today in ASEAN, as you mentioned about piracy, terrorism, and even environmental problems such as haze. So as much as we focus on the overlapping claim in South China Sea for that matter, I also sincerely believe that we should also address the issue of non-traditional security challenges that is facing most ASEAN countries.
Dr. Ishtiaq, maybe we could focus a little bit on how border security is maintained and shared responsibility for these borders. Further highlighted, there are member states who are perhaps not at a liberty to spend the kind of money other member states are able to on security. So how will these resources be shared amongst the member states?
Okay, now before we move into this security aspect, actually ASEAN was created in 1967 with a very limited goal, right? If you look at the declaration, very short, and it only talked about economic and social cooperation, nothing else. Because the founding members, the founding fathers of ASEAN understood very well that if you bring in a security aspect, then there will be disagreements. Because there were a lot of territorial dispute at that moment. So they tried to not to talk about that so much. But having said that, things began to change in 1990s. The end of the Cold War, for example, both the Soviet Union and the United States withdrew their bases from Southeast Asia, so there was a power vacuum. And immediately, something happened in 1991, which was the Kuwaiti invasion and occupation by Iraq. That alarmed many of the smaller states here. They really became concerned about their own security. And therefore, in the 1990s, there were other things too, and that is when most of the ASEAN member countries, not officially, but through their various strategic institutes, began a dialogue as to how to fill up this power vacuum. And then you had ARF, for example, which still is a forum for security dialogue, not only among ASEAN states, because ASEAN countries understand very well that you have to get the major powers involved because it's a strategically very important area, right? So it cannot deny this area to the major powers' presence. So therefore, they came up with the idea of ARF, which is mostly informal dialogue but anybody can talk about any issues dealing with security. The point that you are raising is you can't have security cooperation until unless you share a common enemy. And ASEAN didn't have any common enemy. So now, as Dr. Roy has pointed out, the common enemy is now non-traditional security threats, which is very clear. You rightly pointed out. Piracy we have been experiencing for a long period of time. Terrorism is, whether we like it or not, terrorism is yet another one. And environmental security is another concern. So I think that ASEAN countries have all the more reasons now for security cooperation than at any point of history, because their existence will be threatened directly. Right? For example, if there is no cooperation in dealing with climate change, right? We must have a common voice here, because the countries themselves cannot resolve these problems on their own. It's impossible. Take, for example, haze. No matter what we do, cooperation is required among the major three countries involved, whether you like it or not. So for the welfare of the people, security has people's welfare in mind. Right? So therefore, I would argue that now the common enemy is the non-traditional security. The sooner this is in place, the better it is. You talked about, those are actually what we call the traditional security threats, right? You are talking about who is going to meet the cost and things like that.
Right.
I think that can be arranged. It's not that difficult. But you also must take into account that ASEAN doesn't have any multilateral security cooperation. Bilateral, yes. Bilateral military exercises are conducted regularly. But this is precisely why they don't want any military alliance among the ASEAN countries. That is out of the question. So if you're thinking in terms of military alliance, it's not going to happen, because it's an indigenously created organization, and that was not the purpose of ASEAN. But what I am trying to argue now, that they have no choice. These non-traditional security threats are there, and they have to find out ways to cooperate with each other in fighting these non-traditional security threats.
In opening up borders and allowing more freedom of movement of persons, there's also the elevated concern of illegal activities being associated with the freedom of movement. Even in the EU, they have experienced this situation, and I do believe that in a certain point in time, we will find that this is a heightened concern in countries which are more developed, where the influx of workers, illegal workers from country to country is more prevalent. Will this also be a point of discussion in a security meeting? Would ASEAN address this as a concern, or is this something for much more future discussions? Dr. Roy.
I believe it has to be part of ASEAN's discussion itself, because that will impinge the economy of the country, as well as rules. Issues such as immigration law and crime. So it has to be incorporated in especially in the ASEAN security and political community, part of its agenda to discuss on such issues. And of course, cooperating, not just this cooperation, I believe, is not just within Southeast Asia. Of course, it is a focus today. We are talking about ASEAN, Southeast Asia, but it has to do with also other regions. We have to seek cooperation of other regions as well, because illegal immigrants, not only within Southeast Asia, from other parts of the world as well.
How do the younger generation see all these security concerns? You are a borderless generation, as I mentioned earlier, and thanks to social media, you're able to reach out, interact with anyone freely. And this is probably something notwithstanding the fact that you live miles apart. The physical barriers almost don't exist to younger persons, and you see yourself human first, member state member or member state citizen second. How do you look at security and the concerns associated with it?
younger generation, we focus more on the non-traditional security, especially human security. With the advancement in technology and communication, everything that's happening either is good or bad, especially if it's bad. The information is disseminated fastly, very fast. And in the area of human security, ASEAN is often criticized for its human rights mechanisms, for its toothless human rights institutions and mechanisms. ASEAN Declaration on Human Rights is not working that well, and to date there's little effort to ameliorate the human security aspect in Southeast Asia. And we can blame the principle of non-interference that's deeply entrenched in the political culture of ASEAN member states. It's sometimes what's happening in the domestic arena of a particular country, the government, they usually justify it in the name of national interest to protect the right of the people. But it is not it is not right. We are aware that it is not right. So the younger generation is not demanding ASEAN to change the policy overnight. No, but they must do. ASEAN must work towards a substantive policy and goals towards ameliorating, improving the human rights situation in Southeast Asia.
The very definition of the word human rights is debatable because different member states will have a different interpretation of what human rights should be. But let's not get into that just yet because it's going to open up another hour of discussion just on the subject of human rights. But moving forward, we have probably like 2 or 3 days away from the arrival of some of the world's biggest leaders. The movers and shakers of the planet themselves are going to be here all in one place at the same time. And we will be hosting not only Premier Deng Xiaoping from China, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe from Japan. We'll also be hosting Prime Minister Medvedev from Russia, Premier Modi from India, and of course, the President of the United States, POTUS himself, Barack Obama, will be here. What does this mean for ASEAN? Having so many superpowers converge in one summit, even if for just one day, for ASEAN to be able to attract all these superpowers to join in the discussion and to have equity in what's been put on the table. What does it mean for us as a tiny 10-member association?
Well, one thing is for sure, you can go through the list. Number one, that ASEAN has come of age, right? Number two, that all the major powers have stakes in Southeast Asia and therefore in ASEAN, right? Number three, that its strategic interests are respected by the major powers. There are 600 million people, we all know that, right? And the per capita income is increasing on a yearly basis, right? That ASEAN is a stable region of the world, right? So that all goes in favor of ASEAN, that it has come of age, right? I think that is very important. That's very important. And everybody respects the stability of Southeast Asian region. That is very important for all the major powers. I think that should give the leaders of ASEAN the kind of confidence they need to play their role, proper role on the world stage. Right? I think that's important. And these are some of the ramifications of their presence here.
What would discussions be like at that level with all 5 premiers part of the dialogue that will be held? 10 member states, what could we possibly put on the table that's not already there? And what kind of discussion will be held between the ASEAN member states and their counterparts from around the world, Dr. Roy?
First and foremost, coming back to your earlier question, it only shows that these major powers, like any other states for that matter, are always driven by their national interests. All states are driven by their national interests. The fact that they have shown a keen interest on Southeast Asia and in ASEAN, it shows the relevance of ASEAN that is still present until today. Some would argue that ASEAN was relevant during the Cold War because of, to suit that time. But the fact that it remained as an organization after 48 years and now the other major powers, as you have mentioned, the leaders, they meet together. So that shows of their interest on ASEAN, number one. Number two, to your question on what would the main agenda of their discussion, I suppose first on what ASEAN has set to achieve the issue of community. And besides that, the issue of security, because they have their security interests, as well as economic issues on cooperation to enhance the greater cooperation among the Southeast Asian countries, the 10 member states, as well as with them as well. And definitely maybe that includes also the issue of the South China Sea, and also the issue on non-traditional security and what just happened in Paris. I suppose
a response
this
to that, an ASEAN response to that. When we look at the economy, it's always been something that we can be proud of, the freedom of movement of goods and how trade has always existed between the various member states. Going back historically, we've had trading partners from around the world acknowledge this region as a maritime center. In fact, Malaysia and Singapore, both being the center for the port industry, is testament of this. We both have international ports, but yet both are thriving to a large extent. When we talk about trade, how easy is it for a business operating from member state A to penetrate the markets of other member states? Is this something that's still nationalistic at heart?
To a certain extent, I mean, the answer would be yes and no, both, right? The intentions, I think, are there. They do realize that there should be more and more free trade, right? But at the same time, because of domestic reasons, the need to protect some of the key domestic sectors, right? Whether it's rice or rice industry or something else, the governments here actually are compelled. They are responding to more domestic reasons. So it's not that they don't want to, but there are compulsions. And that is why you will see that after the ASEAN free trade area has not yet really kicked on, there are a number of stumbling blocks, right? Various countries have their own key sectors which they identify, and they're out to protect. I wouldn't say out to protect. Let me say that these are the challenges. These are the challenges. What we need to do is to sit down and very openly talk about these issues, right? For example, what I observed, that if you're looking at between the two countries like Singapore and Malaysia, right? They have streamlined customs, for example, right? Exchange of goods have not yet, they don't stop even for a second. Trading still goes on. So I would always say that I have confidence that the ASEAN leaders are very pragmatic. They're very pragmatic leaders, unlike other regions of the world. And they realize it's the primacy of economic that matters. And so long that is the driving force, I think the rest, unlike European Union, they would try to avoid the mistakes committed by the European Union. There are serious problems, as we can see, unfolding, right? So there are plus points as well as minus points. And I think it's a blessing in disguise that ASEAN leaders can look at European Union and learn lessons and then try to avoid the mistakes committed by them.
When we come back to this discussion, we'll be focusing a little bit more on the economy, but also the interesting developments in member states. Myanmar, for instance, has a very new regime that's waiting to sort of form and take shape. So what does this mean for the rest of ASEAN? We will come back and put that on the table for discussion. Don't go anywhere, stay right where you are. Rolling out the red carpet to the world, not just the ASEAN member states, as they all convene for the 27th ASEAN Summit, where we'll see the birth of the ASEAN community, and we will celebrate the unity that has been established since 1967. Trade has always been a focal point of positivity. There's always been this diaspora of goods and services that have moved quite freely between the member states, and barriers to entry have been minimal. But as we have discussed, there are nationalistic interests within each member state, and these components are present even in the most developed economies. So moving forward, let's address some of these barriers to entry for trade within the ASEAN member state community. AFTA is already, getting started. Let's just put it that way. It's getting started. It's being kicked off in the right direction. But there are still some streamlining required between member states. How do you see the smoothing out of these processes? Where can we improve where we've failed to do so in the past? Dr. Roy.
All right. When we look at the, in terms of trade reduction, especially with the AES, the ASEAN Economic Community, a lot of these tariffs and tariff barriers have been taken away or minimized. But only, of course, there are also the non-tariff barriers are still in existence, partly because of, there's still nationalistic sentiment within member states to preserve that particular industry. And so that is something which is unavoidable. But I sincerely believe as years pass by and more intra-trade within ASEAN has taken place. And this is one of the achievements of ASEAN, which many of us may not, or many people out there may not understand or know. They just think that ASEAN, what I gain from ASEAN. But there are also a lot of benefits from ASEAN that are not noticeable, such as in terms of movement of people, even tourism for that matter. In the past, we always think of when we want to go for a holiday, Australia, or say Europe, North America. But today, thanks to, of course, lower air flight like through Air Asia and all, but that again, now today we look upon destination like in Indonesia, visiting Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines. So these are all, I would say, part of the achievement of ASEAN integration as well as an economic integration as well.
We've been talking about trade, but to the young people, trade means something completely different. It's social entrepreneurship. That's the buzzword for young people today. And every business has a social component, not just as CSR, but at the heart of the business itself. It's a social component. It's about doing the right thing. It's about a component that improves the lives of the customers, not just trade and have economic gain. On the table for a recent youth summit was the idea and the concept of voluntarism. How do you see that playing into trade, social entrepreneurship, and what was the outcome of that youth summit which you attended, Fazillah?
I see. Voluntarism, it is a very noble work, and in ensuring, in improving the human security and development.
It means a lot to the young people.
Yeah,
right?
it means a lot to the young people. We are the social media generation. We are the generation who are really care about human rights, about voluntarism, about human development. So in trade area, it is a very good move. ASEAN Youth Summit has proposed that ASEAN itself should include not only CSR, but it must go beyond CSR. The countries must be responsible of the companies must be responsible in ensuring the human aspect of the workers, things like that. So it is a very good move for ASEAN to bring forward the notion of trade and corporate social responsibility and voluntarism.
These are new concepts for ASEAN. I mean, if we go back in time, voluntarism, social entrepreneurships, even CSR was never on the table for discussion.
Even one of the agenda of ASEAN was also to help in SME as
right.
well.
Yes,
yeah.
There's an SME component now, and there's also a CSR component. There's a combination of many different parties that have come together to form an ASEAN CSR movement. So for the very first time, we can see CSR take center stage, and that discussion was held here as well in Malaysia. So many new aspects are being brought into the idea and concept of trade. Addressing all these is going to pose a different challenge to the leaders of ASEAN. But let's move forward and look at how Malaysia has done as the chairman of ASEAN. So far, we have held the chair for four terms,
yeah.
and this is our fourth. What have we achieved as the chair of ASEAN, Dr. Roy?
I think because the year hasn't really ended yet, so we are still holding the chair until next year we pass it to Laos. I believe that Malaysia have been able to stir up this sentiment of community building, right? Bringing this sentiment of community building, at least for this purpose of the year. And besides that, Malaysia has also garner this interest among the members and even within Malaysia itself on ASEAN for some time. So this is what I think Malaysia has been doing to promote this ASEAN, as a chair of ASEAN.
Doctor, we've moved into a dimension where our Prime Minister has highlighted it's not just a government-to-government organization, but a people-to-people organization. How are we achieving this as the chair?
I wouldn't know the details, how you're going to do that, but it is true that if you want to have integration, it has to be bottom-up approach, right? But unfortunately, most of the regional organizations like ASEAN or the European Union and others, all are elite-driven. It's top-down. And it's very difficult, and that's what you can see in Europe. The problem is, we know about the problems in the European Union has, right? For example, in the EU elections, not too many EU citizens turn up for vote. In fact, they're fed up with Brussels because they look at it just another government, another national government. I think ASEAN should not be doing that kind of a thing, and I'm very sure that the Prime Minister of Malaysia is very concerned about that. I'm pretty sure of that. So what I'm trying to say is, by engaging the people, there's the only way out. And you can only achieve a community only if young people like her actually accept ASEAN as their own. It's a bottom-up approach. And it's going to be not easy for the obvious reasons, as I tried to point out earlier. Because, let's not forget, she's also Malaysian, he's also Malaysian, right? So their loyalty to the nation is supreme. If you carry out any survey, even among the young people, if you ask one simple question, would you like to give up your passport and accept an ASEAN passport? The answer would be no. You see? So until that is done, it's very difficult to say that whatever steps, whether Malaysia or Laos take in the future, it is going to be extremely difficult, mainly because of the very nature of the state. We are still post-colonial societies. It's going to take a lot of time to change that mentality.
How do you see this integration taking place on the ground between the young people? Because the area where you are involved in integration is an area which is rather pure. There are no political agendas as of yet on the table. It is purely young people getting together to discuss. So how do you see the integration at that point?
Right. I just want to add, I would like to add to the point that has Malaysia achieved anything as the chairman of ASEAN 2015? When it comes to the level of awareness of Malaysian young generation about ASEAN, it is relatively low compared to other ASEAN countries, member states. If you go to Thailand, my friend, she went to Thailand, she's in this kind of dance, cultural dance group, and she went to perform in schools in Thailand, and surprisingly, all those young kids, as age 10 to 15, they know about ASEAN. But the thing is, it's not, it is yet, we have yet to see a high level of awareness about ASEAN in Malaysia, and the integration, it should come, it should exist in every single part of ASEAN. If you go to Papua, For example, even if you go to the rural areas in Sabah or Sarawak, people there must know what is ASEAN. You know, maybe not about the political security things going on in ASEAN, no, but they must know what is ASEAN. Then only the sense of togetherness for ASEAN to become a resilient organization can be felt. And it helps ASEAN in becoming a stronger regional organization.
So you're saying this awareness is still low?
Very low.
In many parts of ASEAN?
In many parts of ASEAN, especially, this is a paradox. In Malaysia, we are the chairman of ASEAN in 2015, and it is a sad situation.
Well, moving forward, we can only hope that that integration at the grassroots level tightens, and social media is definitely one vehicle to achieve this. Because we're running out of time, let's just focus a little bit on Myanmar and the change of dynamics that's happening there. When something of this magnitude happens and there's a change in dynamics, whether it's a political system of the country or the governing forces behind it, how does it affect the other member states of ASEAN, or is there a little ripple effect? Dr. Ishtiaq, perhaps you'd like to start us off?
I think that is very good news for ASEAN, because ASEAN had been engaged with Myanmar for a pretty long time. Unlike the Western powers who wanted to put more economic sanctions, ASEAN said no. In fact, they talked about what is known as constructive engagement. And people have ridiculed this whole idea sometimes. I'm not saying that it is because of that what is happening, but certainly the Myanmarese government understood very well that in order to gain advantage out of it, they have to do something about their domestic situation. There's no compulsion, and there's another principle. Non-interference also means that we are ready to accept any form of government, unlike EU. We don't do that. We don't impose any conditions for any country to join. I think that's a plus point, and perhaps it will encourage those young people like you who are talking about human rights, right? Who are talking about democratic rights, and this is a welcome news for all of us who would actually have further belief in ourselves, right?
Yeah. And this is also to show that, because way back in 1997, I remember that when Myanmar was incorporated as a member of ASEAN, there were a lot of condemnation towards ASEAN. Why accept Myanmar at that time? And that's why we came up with this agenda known as constructive engagement. So the fact that there is a positive change within Myanmar is a plus point for ASEAN, where ASEAN would say that right from the beginning, we never excluded any members. We don't prejudge any potential member or a member. And, of course, I'm not attributing the change within Myanmar is because solely of ASEAN. But the point remains that there have been positive change to Myanmar. So in 1997, of incorporating Myanmar as a member of ASEAN was not a wrong move, and that has been, we have now witnessed the positive changes within ASEAN, within Myanmar, and we hope that it will continue. Because it's relatively still too new, because what form of government is going to be established is still yet to be seen. But we hope there will be stability within Myanmar, because it will have an effect on ASEAN as a whole. We know about the Rohingya problem and things like that.
The 27th ASEAN Summit is upon us, and the resolution that will come out of that meeting will have a significant effect on the community moving forward. What are your hopes for the 27th ASEAN Summit?
I hope that ASEAN will have a better degree of cooperation with other member states within ASEAN itself, and with the democratization, with the good progress happening in Myanmar, it is a first move for ASEAN to cooperate to have a better degree of cooperation intra-region. And as a young representing the youth, I want ASEAN to have more programs available, be provided for the youth. Sports, maybe if intra-varsity regional competition, games, something like that.
Dr. Roy, where do you see us in a year when Laos takes up the chair? How will we move forward from what has been already put in place by the Malaysian chairmanship?
As I mentioned that This is a long process. Laos will have to undertake what the foundations that have been placed in 2015, and but we should also move to look at the next decade, in 2015 to 2025. That maybe by 2025 we will see the community, the 3 pillars of ASEAN will take shape in a more clearer vision. So not just in a year, but I would say we look at in the next decade, and then the issue of centrality of ASEAN, how the 10 member states work together, work closely, meantime able to cooperate with the major powers, China, United States, Japan, India.
Being the independent person in the room, the one looking outward on ASEAN, how do you see us as a community, and where do you see us in the next 5 to 10 years, the next decade?
I'm not so sure whether you can put me into that box, right? Because that I spent about 30 years of my life in Southeast Asia. I would say that my expectations would be that they will move towards some sort of community building, because without which the founding members, the founding fathers' aims, what they wanted to really become, could not be fulfilled. And I think what Malaysia actually had wanted to do was a lot, no doubt. But that takes me to the domestic situation. Because of number of situations here, unfortunately,
we will have to have this discussion another day, because we are at the end of the program. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here in the studio and discussing on the various issues which have been part of the ASEAN community, and moving forward, what will we expect from the 27th ASEAN Summit. It's upon us, and we play host, so once again, roll out the red carpet and be as hospitable and as welcoming as you always have Malaysia to the rest of the world. The ASEAN agenda takes center stage at the 27th Summit. We are just days away, and we will have another discussion on the 23rd, which will actually take apart the summit itself and its components. So stay right where you are watching us on RTM or on MyClicks, where this program is probably available to you at your convenience. I'm Terence. Thank you for watching. Salam Satu Malaysia, and good night.